The Special Investigating Unit has released an 85-page report detailing findings of its investigations into PPE procurement fraud. The data revealed that during the period between April and November 2020, over 30 billion rand was spent by state institutions on PPE, of which more than 13 billion rand is subject to the SIU investigation. In the report, the SIU recommends that legislative amendments be considered to ensure that influential people or their relatives do not benefit from PPE procurements from state institutions. While SIU head Andy Mothibi joins me now for this conversation. Andy, thanks a lot for joining us this evening. So the report reveals how 25 officials have been implicated in PPE tender irregularities. I mean, obviously this is worth millions of rands. The implicated officials, how far are we from instituting any form of arrest?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we've got you. Andy, go ahead.
Thank you. In one instance, in the OR Tambo in particular, the arrests have been effected. The one director of an entity has been arrested, and that case is underway. Cases that have been referred to the criminal investigation and prosecution. So in others, the NPA has already allocated prosecutors to guide the process so that it's effective, and when it gets to court, there are little surprises, and then we can get on with the prosecution and convictions. So that's the 38. The 25 officials that have been referred for disciplinary process, it's those officials of government who made themselves guilty, according to the evidence that we've found, of misconduct during these irregularities and disregarding the law and procedures, and ultimately creating or causing irregular procurement. So those, we expect that the accounting or officials or accounting authorities of the state institutions, departments, municipalities, and so on, we expect that they act on those officials. So there's three streams here: criminal prosecution and civil, disciplinary action, and there's now this big part which refers to the civil litigation and civil recoveries. You would have seen, Faith, that on the 4th, before we released our report, the special tribunal ruled in our favor with regard to the case in Gauteng, and cumulatively 26 million, which was paid as part of the 39 million, has been forfeited to the state so that it can go back to the Department of Health, and we've managed to save then the 100 million that was not paid out. So cumulatively is 126 million that has been saved. Up to now, there's about 15 cases worth 365 million of contract value that we have identified up to date. Remember, the investigation is still going on. Up to date, we've got those cases in the special tribunal, and the legal teams are hard at work to ensure that we demonstrate that we can recover. Yeah. And I know that emphasis is also put on the stream on prosecution. We're working closely with the Hawks and the NPA to ensure that we put those cases through prosecution process so that the public can now see the consequence management in all these streams: civil, disciplinary action, and criminal prosecution.
You know, Andy, unfortunately, when it comes to this kind of investigation, where you see that so many fingers were in the cookie jar in terms of looting, literally looting from the state, one wonders the time that will take before we actually see people account for their actions. I mean, for example, this 1,774 service providers that are under investigation. I mean, this is a huge investigation. How long do you think that will take?
We reported on Friday, Faith, if you can recall our report. In our report, we've finalized of those 1,774, we've finalized 141 service providers, which translates to 164 contracts, and it's 26% of all the work that we're doing. Yeah. We are currently busy with 1,541 contracts of 777 service providers. And that part is currently underway. When we reported, we said, including the contracts that must still commence investigation, which is about 661, And the value of all of those, I think you've mentioned it already when you introduced, is 13.3 billion.
Yeah.
We were giving ourselves about on the investigations on our books now, about 6 months to go. We should wrap them up.
So you're going to wrap up the entire, if I may, you're able to wrap up this 1,000, because you're mentioning 26% of those that have been concluded, 1,774 service providers that still have to account somewhat for their actions, or 20 or more than, the other half of the 26% really having to account for their actions. So you're saying in 6 months' time you'll be able to give us good information in terms of how far these companies are in terms of being brought to book?
Yes, remember it's the companies that we are investigating, the contract which have been awarded to them, including some of the outcomes that we reach in the process of the 6 months. And by the way, we won't wait for 6 months and before, as we've been doing, right? Already, if we find that there's misconduct, we find that there's criminal action, and we find that the contract is irregular, we act immediately. So the 6 months is really a time frame within which we will cover, the contract investigations that are on our books. But the actions, we action them immediately.
Talk to us about this action very quickly, because unfortunately time is not on our side. 6,140 government officials that have been claiming from the Unemployment Insurance Fund as well. That's 6,140 government officials that are stealing from the state. What happens to them? Similarly, those individuals will be identified. We would expect that the same process be taken, that they be disciplined, and then if they're found guilty, our expectation is that they should be out of the system. But if we find that they've, of course, benefited unduly, then that money must be returned to the state. All right, and then also this legislative amendments are to be considered. What are you, when you're saying that we need to be able to institute legislative amendments to ensure that this does not happen again, how far are you in being able to influence almost that process? Because otherwise, and you and I can agree, that money is going to be stolen from the taxpayer time and time again.
Right. We've already started the process. Remember, there's this public procurement legislation that is out for comment. We are making our inputs in that process, and we're hoping that our inputs will, of course, be received positively. That is the general outcry that we have picked up relating to people who get contracts, and it is alleged that they are linked to politically exposed people or prominent people. As we sit today, the legislation it's really not explicit in terms of if I'm linked to a particular person and I get the contract legitimately, then that the legislation does not prohibit that. But of course, if the contract has been acquired irregularly and with corrupt means, perhaps, we find out and we declare that contract irregular and set it aside, and we take then the consequence management in terms of criminal prosecution, and where officials are involved, disciplinary process.
We're going to leave it there. SIU head Andy Mothibi, they're giving us the latest on that investigation of finding. It's an 85-page report, obviously implicating dozens of officials as well as millions or billions of rands that have been stolen from the state.